After her church confirmation at age 14, Helen's father Harry drove her from Minnesota to live on the family farm in North Dakota. It was an adjustment for Helen, moving from the city to the farm.
My grandfather had died when I was 13. That's Carl, my dad's dad. And my grandmother went out there and was with him when he died. And when next year I'm 14, and she says, well, you know, you're in high school now. If you're going to ever know your dad and brothers, you have to go stay with them now. And I said, well, Grandma, I'm just getting old enough now, so I'm some help to you. And I think I should stay and take care of you. She says, oh no, I'll manage. And you know, by now, she's up 79 years old. But she insisted. My dad came and got me, and she loaded the car with everything she could possibly think of that I would need on the farm. So Southbourne High School, I moved to Plaza, North Dakota. And we lived 11 miles from the school, so I couldn't drive, and there was nothing I could do, so I had a boarding room with a family in Plaza. And my neighbor said, well, their daughter could be my roommate. So Adele Edwards and I were roommates at the Bergstrom family home. And we'd go home weekends whenever we could and when the weather permitted. We had a lot of snow. A lot of times we'd have to go with a bobsled and horses because the roads were all blocked. During the years that I lived in North Dakota, we had what we called the Dust Bowl. There were 10 years where we didn't have any rain, and we used to have a big orchard and lots of raspberry bushes and things. Everything died. People had to get rid of their cows, their sheep, their horses, everything, because there was nothing for them to eat. The dust would be so thick that if you were driving your car, you'd have to stop every once in a while to make sure you were on the road, because you couldn't tell the difference between the ditches and the road and the fields. And that was when everybody had a rough time making it. And that is when my dad's insurance policy that he took out when he got married came due and payable to him, and it was $20,000. So here he was, he had plenty of money, because at that time $20,000 was a lot of money. $100 a month was big wages at that time. And at the time I had a little white poodle dog. And my dad said I could have it. Jacobsons wanted to give it to me, but he said, you've got to give it a bath every week, and you've got to dry it in front of the fire oven. So I had to come home every weekend to give that little dog a bath. And it was the nicest little dog. Then when my dad's brother from Thief River Falls came out, and they brought their couple little girls with them, and they loved that dog. They wanted that dog so bad. And my dad says, why didn't you give that dog to them? It's a big chore for you to come home and give it a bath every week. Why don't you just let them have it? So I did. The girls were elated. Well, see, I never had anything but that pet rooster until I got to the farm. And Dad figured we should have a dog, so I could have a dog. And I chose this one that was half collie and half sheepdog. Beautiful, beautiful dog, and so nice. And it got kicked in the head by one of the horses, so it was deaf, but it knew hand motions. And all Dad would have to do is say, go get the cows, and it would go bring the cows in for milking. And we had quite a sophisticated barn with a milking machine and everything in it. So, we didn't have electricity when I first came to the farm, but Cliff built a wind charger, which charged batteries, which gave us electricity in the house. And Cliff wasn't very old, but he wired the whole house and the barn and machine shops, everything with electricity. And we had motors on the pumps. But we had running water in the house. We had a pump, and it was the best water in the whole community. Everybody came there to get coffee water because it made such good coffee. And we just had outdoor privy there. And it was the freeholder, wasn't for the little kids. And when Carol was little, she wouldn't go out there I had to spank her to make her go out there and go back through.
Well, we had the windmill there, and we had a pump on it, and we had a big water tank out there. And I went and stuck my tongue on that in cold weather and got it stuck there once. Oh yeah, the wind blows all the time. And we had electric lights at the farm because Cliff built a wind charger. Now Palmer's folks had a wind charger, but it charged batteries. And they had to use 6 batteries to keep their lights going. And where Cliff got a charger and kept it going most all the time, so we had electricity all through the house. This is on the Bergstrom Farm. Well, that's the barn. It's still standing. That's the barn. Oh, that was Cheryl's playhouse, and also the well house first, and then she used her playhouse and had her phone in it so she could call her mother at the house and her dad out at the shop. So this is going into the Bergstrom Farm. There was a big slough there, and they had the old granary there, which is gone, and that's a Quonset hut. They had a pig barn there, and the chicken coop, and quite a few things. They took all that stuff away. Now, this looks like the windmill at Cliff's place.
And when I first went up there to Plaza, I thought, well, I'll continue with basketball. And so I went to the first meeting of the basketball team, and there was a girl named Della Dugan there. And she started raving and ranting about these country hicks coming in thinking they could take over. I got up and walked out of there. I didn't feel I needed to take any guff off for anybody, because I was on the first team in Moorhead, and I knew I was good. The coach followed me outside and said, "You come on back. You don't pay any attention to her." And I made the first team, of course, in Plaza, and we went for the state championship. But I fouled out. I had a dream the night before that I'd fouled out. Since the breakfast, I was telling them all about it. And they said, "Now, don't you dare foul out." What do I do but foul out 3 times, one right after the other? And so I couldn't play, and we lost the state championship. And they all blamed it on to me because I wasn't able to play. But I played all through high school, regardless, and enjoyed it very much. Girls' rules were entirely different then than they are now. And then for a while, they didn't have girls' basketball teams. They just had boys. But now they're back to having girls play basketball again, and especially at the University of Washington. And so this is kind of interesting for me, but they've changed the rules entirely. Not different than when I played.
Helen has always been an entrepreneur, seeing opportunities everywhere, even as a teenager.
We still all economized because we didn't want to run out of money. And my dad had milk cows, and he had a milking machine and everything, and he'd haul the cream into town every day, and I'd have to wash that separator and clean it. And I got the idea that, hey, maybe I could churn the butter and make butter to have customers and charge 5 cents a pound more than the store does. And so I asked my dad about it, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, you buy the groceries and you could have anything over that you could make." And so every time Palmer came over to see me, I'd get him to churn on this barrel churn and turn it, and we'd get butter, because I had all this cream. And then I was very, very careful to wash all the buttermilk out of the butter, so it never ever got rancid or you could taste it. And I went to town and got my customers. I sold them 3 pounds at a time in a crock. And if I had any butter left over, then Mr. Salmonson at the big store would buy it. And he would pay me by 5 cents over the pound. And he would raise it another 5 and sell it to the store because it was such good butter. When I was 14, I moved to North Dakota, and at that time I had visions of being a journalist and writing detective stories. And so I went to the local newspaper because I thought I might get some experience there in journalism. And she needed a typesetter. So she taught me how to set type with this old-fashioned typing machine for the weekly newspaper that they put out. And then I decided that I wasn't learning anything at all, and all I was doing was working, setting type. And it was a lot of work, so I quit it. And then I gave up the hope of being a journalist and a book writer. Well, after I decided I didn't want to be a newspaper writer or work in a newspaper office, I started sewing dresses. And I had a pattern I cut out myself out of newspaper, and I'd buy the fabric, buttons and zipper and everything I needed, and sew the dresses and sell them to my classmates for $1 a piece. And that was a real steal. They could help pick out the fabric. And they were very simple princess style dresses, but everybody liked them, and they fit them real good. And so that was one way I got some extra money.
It took longer for technological advancements to spread to the rural areas and farms.
They're harvesting the fall crop, and my dad still was using an old threshing machine. But they were going to get a new combine, because combines were just coming in and everybody was using them because they were so much better. But my dad made me come out to the field where they were harvesting with the old threshing machine, made me throw 2 bundles of wheat into the feeder, and he said, I want you to do this. This is the last chance you'll ever have to do this. And I wanted you to be able to say that you threw some wheat into the threshing machine and watched it being threshed. Finally got phones of the farm. They were party lines. And the phone would ring, and you had a certain number of rings would be yours. And you could listen in on the neighbor's conversation. Nothing was private. And so people were so happy when they were able to get private phones. And of course the first phones, you would have to ask the operator for the number because we didn't have phone books.
Palmer Clouston was Helen's husband for 46 years, but she remembers first meeting him when she was only 10 years old.
How I met him the first time, he and his mother rode down to Moorhead with my dad. My dad come down to see us, and so they came down, and Palmer was 7 years old. He had a cowboy uniform with leather chaps and 2-gun holster, cowboy hat, and did he think he was smart stuff. And I was quite impressed by him. But anyway, I didn't meet him again until I moved to North Dakota when I was 14. Then I met him. And then we started going together, and I went to off and on with him and then with other guys. But I made it through high school, and I tied for salutatorian. So I did good enough, I guess. Then I wanted to go to college in Minot. And of course Dad said he couldn't afford to pay for all of it. And so Palmer, my husband's mother, said she'd help me out. So we went to Minot, and she went to the Charleston furniture store because they did real well and were quite well off. And she asked them if they didn't need somebody to take care of the little girl, who was the baby, and then they had 2 boys, and it would give Mrs. Charleston more free time. And they said, oh, sure. So that's what we did. My dad gave me money for my books and tuition and stuff like that, and then I worked for my board and room. And that way I was able to go to the Teachers College.
After graduating from Teachers College in 1933, Helen taught at the local schoolhouse in Plaza.
Oh, now this is when I taught school. I taught there for 1 year. And we had a barn by the school where we could ride our horses to school and put them in the barn. Well, every morning I had to go build a fire in the great big furnace that we had, and it had indoor plumbing, one for the boys and one for the girls. And I had 9 students, and 4 of them were boys, much taller than I was. I discovered that Harvey Edwards read backwards. What do you call that?
Dyslexia?
Yeah. And so everything I did with him was oral. And he was so smart, as long as it was all oral. And, you know, he turned out to be one of the best one of the Edwardses. And of course, they didn't want to claim him because they said he was dumb, but he was not dumb. He was very, very smart. I mean, everything was done verbally, and everything registered with him, and he remembered it. But he just could not read.
I taught at the home school there, and we didn't get paid wages. We got warrants. I got $45 a month warrant. And if I cashed it, I wouldn't get nearly as much as $45. So my dad says, okay, you give me your warrants, and every time you need money, you let me know and I'll let you have some. Well, I managed with my churning of butter to get along, had plenty of money. And so I accumulated $775 in my teaching account, warrants, because my dad just held them. And we got 7% interest on those warrants if we held them. And so the year after we'd settled in Seattle, we went back to visit my dad and family and Palmer's family. And my dad had just bought a brand new 1936 Chevrolet, brand new. And he said, you know what? If you want to give me those school warrants, I'll give you this new car. Well, we were delighted.
Helen and Palmer married in secret on February 29, 1936, and didn't tell anyone until July. But his mother caught on fairly quickly.
Now this is in North Dakota at the farm. His mother wanted to have a garden wedding that year, and we hadn't told him yet that we'd gotten married in February and didn't tell anybody.
When she came back from being in Minneapolis, she said, did you get married while I was gone? And Palmer said, well, why? What makes you think that? Well, your white shirt has been worn. But we didn't tell anybody till July when we got ready and decided we wanted to go out west. He didn't want a farm. He didn't want anything to do with the farm. And so he had been out to Seattle with Raleigh Baxter, and he loved it. He loved the Seattle area.
He and Raleigh Baxter had traveled across country, rode the freights, did everything to get a ride out to Seattle. And then they went to saloons, or bars as they were called, and play, and then people had to donate to the tin cup they had. And they made enough money to pay for their room and for their food and everything that they needed. And then they came home, and that's all they talked about, because they wanted to live in Seattle. And so the July after we were married, we packed up the car with everything we could, and we had an old clunker of an Oakland, that's all we had, and went out to Seattle and we camped. We had a tent and camping gear and everything, so we camped all the way out to Seattle rather than stay in hotels.
Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love.